Shabbat Shalom. So I've got some good news and some bad news. The good news is, according to the latest Pew survey of Jewish demographics, there are more Jews in the United States than ever before. There are more than 7 million Jews, and we seem to be growing. It is a nice turnaround from all of the doom and gloom that I grew up with in the 80s and 90s of everybody saying that this would be the last generation and so on and so forth. I can see not only from the statistics, but even from our own room, the reports of our demise were greatly exaggerated and premature. But there's also a little bad news, at least if you're a rabbi. And that is the fact that even though the number of people who are Jewish is growing, the number of people who actually engage in what might be called core Jewish religious activities, that's not doing so hot. And it's not just that it's low, it is half of what non-Jewish numbers look like. So, for example, what percentage of the non-Jewish population do you think goes to services, more or less once a week? It's about 40% or so is the average, at least according to self-reported statistics. We don't actually put GPS collars on average people and track them, but according to their own reporting, about 40%. Among the Jewish population, 20. Half of that. Seems that people don't like going to shul all that much, or temple, or synagogue, or whatever you want to call it. It's just not quite as common of an activity as we might hope. Yes, Aaron? Self-reported. Yes, that I still find that number a little high. It depends, distributed across the entire Jewish population, but 20% is still a lot less than it ought to be. If we were able to get even up to 40% of the Jewish population, like our non-Jewish neighbors, well, that would double synagogue attendance across the country, and I think we would all be very happy about that. When we look at the values, the activities, the core identity markers, when we look for the most iconic, what is it to be a Jew, according to Torah, according to Jewish tradition, it is, of course, the mitzvot, commandments. Yet, when you look at the list of all of the different activities and passions that motivate those that are Jews, that's actually at the bottom of the list. Only around 14 or 15% of people actually consider that to be a primary value of their Jewish identity. On the other hand, commemorating the Holocaust and remembering the tragedy, up in the high 70%. Living an ethical, living a moral life, also up in the 70%. Doing acts of kindness, acts of tzedakah, acts of justice, up in the 60%. Doing acts that are supportive of our brothers and sisters in the land of Israel, even more important over the last few weeks, but always important, also up in the 50 or so percent. These are clear, strong markers. Jewish law, not so much. Going to services, not so much. So what do people want to do if it's not go to services? Well, it turns out, and I don't think this is going to surprise anyone, the number one thing people like to do is spend time with their family and friends. It's almost like we're all human beings. But therein lies the head scratcher. It seems that people are interested in preserving the memory of the tragedy of the Holocaust and the lessons that we learned. People are interested in living a moral and ethical life. People are interested in preserving the acts of kindness and righteousness. People are interested in helping Israel. People are interested in spending time with their family and friends. But they're not so interested in why we do those things. Why we preserve our family traditions, why we preserve our place within the forefront of acts of justice, why we work so hard to preserve the memory of the Holocaust. It's just something we do. It is akin, if you will pardon the expression, of people who have found the fruit at the edge of the branches of a tree and have plucked the fruit, ignoring the fact that there's an actual tree in the center of all of those branches, as though the fruit simply blossomed out of nothingness and can be plucked, eaten, and enjoyed because indeed it is among the sweetest parts of what we have. This would also be very similar to those that have found great passion and enjoyment from music, from art, from movies, TV, or other forms of entertainment, to think that there's really no reason to support museums, concerts, opera, ballet, art galleries, or even art education, music education, or other forms of creative expression. As though the fruits that have been developing for thousands of years throughout human culture can be enjoyed without watering the roots that led to its creation. The ultimate irony, of course, is that the core of Judaism, the core values and teachings that are embedded within that trunk, the mitzvot, the commandedness, the concepts of God, the concepts of what it means to be a spiritual creature, that is entirely harmonious and, in fact, invigorating for all of the things that people say that they like most. You like spending time with your family and friends? Who here finds that easy to do? Who here finds that they always have too much time for their family and friends? I don't think I've ever met anyone say, you know what's the problem, Rabbi? I just can't get rid of my family and friends. It seems like I'm stuck with them too often. Yeah, maybe during the original COVID lockdown, a few people were saying that, but by and large, that is not a typical complaint. And what does Judaism offer? Shabbat, the Hagim, the different holidays, our life cycle events, built in moments where we are given time, where we are directed, where we are commanded to be with our family, with our friends, with our community, so that we don't have an excuse to put off those activities that we know we want. People say that they want to live an ethical, a moral life. This is beautiful and this is wonderful. How? How do you know what is ethical? How do you know what is moral? Is it what you feel is ethical or moral today? Is it what you feel is ethical or moral when you are confronted with a particular object of consideration? Or is it based upon some understanding, some depth, some study, some engagement with others in meaningful debate and discussion to clarify, to preserve a cleaner understanding of what is and right that goes beyond your personal interests of the moment and our own individual meager ability to assess what is going on? Judaism tells you you need to learn more to be a good person. Indeed, the words of Pirkei Avot says that a fool cannot be a righteous person, because the fool simply doesn't understand what is going on around. Stephen. Some people can feel what is ethical. Indeed, I will argue that some people can feel it, but the individual feeling does not make for an ethical action because it makes them disconnected from the community. And ethics and morality are a community activity, not an individualistic one. Because ultimately a decision of ethics or morals will have an impact not only on that individual, but also on those around. And so regardless of my own internal compass, at some point I must examine that in light of the opinions of others, so that we can come to an agreement of what will or will not be done. Only the hermit can live a purely ethical life in isolation. The rest of us must live amongst each other. And so my individual feelings, which are not subject to debate and discussion, they need to be set to one side while I open up the discussion with others on an equal playing field so that we can all analyze, discuss, and reach a shared understanding so that we can live together in an ethical and moral community. But when a person is left only to themselves, whether because of their feelings, which may be true and powerful, or because of their whims, which may be misleading, then we have no shared basis for that understanding. Indeed, I will examine this topic in much more detail in Sunday night's Tikkun Leil Shavuot. as part of the Federation welcoming of the holiday of Shavuot. So if you want to continue this discussion on that topic of how we share this understanding, please make sure you're registered with the Federation for that program. All of the things that we value most in Judaism, that are valued statistically the highest, are ultimately embedded, fed, and reinforced through Judaism. And without that, they will eventually atrophy and drift. Without that constant renewal from the source, the fruit will not continue to be ripe when plucked from the tree. And you who have already made the decision to be here, you who are among that rare minority, well, you're not off the hook just because you're here. I know that much of what I'm saying is probably preaching to the choir, but you have an additional responsibility. You have seen the value of being part of a community, of engaging in prayer and worship with others, of being attendant to Jewish concepts that go beyond the surface. You have an obligation to share that with others. There is a teaching in this week's Torah portion that says, these are the generations of Aaron and Moses. And immediately after giving this introduction, we get a list of all of Aaron's kids. The rabbis of old scratched their heads and said, wait a minute, these aren't the generations of Aaron and Moses. These are the generations of Aaron. Moses is kind of a third wheel here. Not so, they argue. For yes, it is true that Moses is not the biological parent of those children, but Moses was a spiritual parent to them as well. And anyone who teaches just a little Torah, just a little bit more of those truths of Judaism to another person, it is as though they were giving them life. It is as though they were being a parent to them. And so Moses is given full credit for his nieces and nephews for having served them as a teacher. You who know this, you have an obligation to teach, to reach out to others, bring a friend to shul, to help them understand the beauty of that core of Judaism, and to recognize that what they already hold dear will only be made better when they engage in it with others, and they engage in it with a deep understanding that comes from participating in that minority activity. Let's see if we can raise those percents a few bars. Shabbat Shalom.